History hides its ugliest truths behind gold and perfume, and nowhere was that disguise more exquisite than in Lima, Peru, in the summer of 1803, a city that glowed like a jewel under Spanish rule, its balconies carved with angels, its plazas alive with gossip and power. But behind the silk, the candlelight, and the hymns of devotion, something darker pulsed beneath the marble floors. This is the story of the slave who impregnated the Marquise and her daughters, a story the Spanish crown sealed away for more than a century, because it tore the mask off everything they wanted the world to believe. At the height of the 18th century, Lima was a paradox, a city both sacred and sinful. It was the capital of the viceroyalty of Peru, the crown's most prized possession in the New World. Here, noble families sent their daughters to convents before marriage and hosted ballroom feasts under chandeliers brought from Cadiz. Every rule was about honor. Every gaze was measured. Every whisper could destroy a name. And inside one of the city's grandest mansions, the Palacio de Diaguer, lived Marquise Catalina de Aguirre Velasco, a woman of beauty and iron. Her late husband had been a governor. Her blood traced to Castilian knights. To the people of Lima, she was the living embodiment of virtue, a widow devoted to God, raising 3 daughters of angelic grace. Isabella, the eldest, composed and proud. Rosa, the dreamer. And Inés, the quiet one who listened more than she spoke. But within that mansion was another presence, a man whose name few dared to say aloud. Domingo, born in bondage, half-educated by a priest who once pitied him. Domingo was owned by the Marquise herself. He worked in the stables, the gardens, sometimes in the house when needed. He was tall, quiet, with eyes that saw too much, the kind of man who knew when to speak and when to disappear. To the family, he was invisible. To the servants, he was both respected and feared. And to the daughters, he was a mystery wrapped in silence. It began as all forbidden stories do, with small, unnoticeable moments. A glance too long across the courtyard. A hand brushing against another in the candlelit hall. A silence that lasted a heartbeat longer than it should have. In a world where men of power own the bodies of others, no one ever asked what those bodies felt, what they dreamed, what they wanted. But Domingo felt, and one by one, so did they. By the winter of 1802, the Marquise's daughters had begun to change, a nervousness in their laughter, an unease in their prayers. The servants noticed. The confessor noticed. Even the Marquise noticed, though she refused to see. For a woman of her status, shame was a death sentence. But fate, it seems, does not bargain with pride. Then came the morning of August 14th, 1803. A maid entered the solar to find Isabella fainted near the mirror. Physicians were summoned. One by one, the truth revealed itself. First Isabella, then Rosa, then Inés, and finally the Marquise herself. For women, all expecting, all naming the same man. Domingo, what followed would shake Lima to its core. Servants whispered prayers. Priests crossed themselves in disbelief. And within hours, word reached the Archbishop's palace. The crown's authority trembled. For in a single night, the boundaries between master and slave, sin and sanctity, order and chaos had been torn apart. Officially, no such scandal ever existed. Records were burned, testimonies silenced. The Palacio de Diaguer was shuttered for months. Those who spoke of it disappeared into convents or prisons. But rumors spread to the markets, through taverns, through the mouths of poets. They said the Marquise's house was cursed. They said the bloodlines of the pure had been defiled. And somewhere in the dark corners of Lima, people whispered not of sin, but of justice. Because Domingo, they said, had not forced anyone. He had been chosen, not once, but 4 times. And that truth was more terrifying to the empire than any act of violence. Imagine for a moment the weight of such a revelation. A man owned by law, touching the untouchable. A world built on control, undone by desire. A family built on piety, destroyed by its own hypocrisy. No sword, no revolution, no battlefield could cause greater chaos than that secret. And yet, amid all the scandal, one question still lingers in the shadows of history. What became of Domingo? Some said he was executed in silence, his body hidden beyond the city walls. Others swore they saw him flee into mountains, carrying with him one of the Marquise's daughters and a newborn child. And a few, only a few, claimed he became something else entirely. A ghost, a legend whispered to slaves across the colonies. A man who had turned chains into rebellion. But to understand the echo of Domingo's defiance, we must look across the ocean, across the decades, to another man, another story, another empire clinging to power through pain. His name was Samuel Green, and his war began 40 years later, in the forests of Alabama. Desire is the oldest rebellion. It creeps where power thinks it reigns unchallenged. And in colonial Lima, where bloodlines were more sacred than God himself, desire was treason, especially when it crossed the lines of class, color, and faith. Inside the Palacio de Diaguer, beneath the frescoed ceilings and painted saints, love had become a secret war. The Marquise Catalina, a woman draped in lace and loneliness, had not felt affection since her husband's death. Her life had been reduced to masses, embroidery, and appearances. But Domingo was everything her world told her to hate. A man of flesh and will, a man who met her eyes without fear. The forbidden fruit that spoke not temptation, but truth. Some say it began one night, when she found him repairing the lanterns in her courtyard. He had burned his hand, and she, out of instinct, reached to soothe him. Her fingers lingered. A silence bloomed, and in that silence, centuries of hierarchy shattered. But their secret could not hide forever. In the shadows of the mansion, someone was always watching. A maid saw her mistress walking alone at night. A chamber boy overheard laughter where no laughter should be. And soon, the whispers reached the daughters. At first, there was anger, a mother's betrayal, a family shame. But then curiosity. Each daughter, in her own way, drew closer to the man their mother had turned into a myth. Was it rebellion? Was it longing for something real, beyond the gilded cage of nobility? Or was it the curse of being born into a world where love was forbidden, yet desire could not be killed? Isabella, the eldest, proud, disciplined, unyielding, saw in Domingo a mirror of courage. Rosa saw in him poetry, a man untouched by vanity. And Inés, the quiet one, saw peace, the kind she never found in her rosaries. In another time, in another land, this would have been tragedy enough. But in Lima, 1803, it was blasphemy. The church ruled the soul. The crown ruled the body. But neither could rule what happened in secret between candlelight and breath. The women of the house, one by one, fell to the same rhythm, the same unholy heartbeat. Domingo became their secret, their confessor, their undoing. And perhaps, though history will never confess it, their liberation. For months, life went on under the shadow of deceit. Dinner was served, prayers were said, but the walls of Palacio began to whisper louder, until the day that could no longer be hidden, the swelling of bellies beneath satin gowns. Panic followed like a storm. The Marquise tried to hide it, sending her daughters to the countryside, calling it a spiritual retreat. But servants talk, and Lima's gossip spreads faster than fire in dry grass. Soon, the archbishop demanded an inquiry. A priest was sent to investigate moral disturbances in the house. And when the truth emerged that for noble women carried the child as slave, the city froze in horror. The archbishop's first words were recorded in a private letter to the viceroy. If this is true, then Satan himself has made his dwelling in Lima. It was a threat to the divine order. If a slave could touch a noble woman, and she consented, then what was left of the empire's illusion of superiority? The viceroy ordered the matter sealed. The church demanded repentance. The Marquise was confined to her estate under silent penance. Her daughters were locked away in separate convents. And Domingo disappeared. Some said he was executed quietly, hanging behind the barracks near the Rimac River. Others whispered he escaped, helped by the same servants who once feared him. And in the mountains, they said a dark-skinned man was seen traveling with a woman and a newborn child, a ghostly echo of forbidden love that refused to die. But the scandal did not vanish with his disappearance. It cracked something deep inside Lima's aristocracy. The Marquise's mansion fell silent. Servants left one by one. Her name was erased from parish records. And yet, in the city's underground, her story became legend. Women whispered it in secret gatherings. Did you hear the Marquise who chose love over law? Did you hear the slave who conquered an empire's pride? It became more than gossip. It became a parable of resistance, a desire against dominion. Decades later, when the wars of independence swept across South America, when Bolivar's men tore down the banners of Spain, old men in taverns told the tale again. They said, before the muskets and the flags, before the generals and their armies, there was love that rebelled first. Maybe that is why the crown buried this story. Not because it was shameful, but because it was prophetic. The empire's power was already crumbling, and it began not on a battlefield, but in the quiet of a candlelit room, where 4 women and 1 man dared to touch the truth of being human. But history has a way of echoing, and 40 years later, another man, another slave, would rise from the soil of oppression and turn his pain into a weapon. His name was Samuel Green, and where Domingo's rebellion began in secret, Green's would ignite the open wilderness of America. 40 years after Lima's forbidden scandal faded into rumor, a storm was brewing across the ocean. The new world, America, was tearing itself apart from the inside, and in the shadows of Alabama's wilderness, 1 man would rise, a living echo of Domingo's defiance, a spirit forged not in luxury, but in chains. His name was Samuel Green. They called him the Phantom of the Ridge. To some, he was a ghost, to others, a monster, but to those who had suffered, he was freedom walking on 2 feet, armed with nothing but will. Samuel Green was born on the Johnson Plantation near Huntsville, Alabama. The records, what little remains, describe him in 1 line. Sam, age 22, field hand, troublesome, twice escaped. Troublesome, that's the word they use when a man refused to die quietly. By the autumn of 1843, Samuel had been whipped, chained, starved, and branded. Each punishment was meant to break him, but instead it sharpened him. He studied the land, the patrols, the habits of dogs, the way sound traveled through pine and fog. And one stormy night, as lightning split the Tennessee sky, he made his final escape. He took nothing but a knife from the smokehouse, a wool blanket, and a fortnight's worth of dried meat. They searched for him for weeks. Bloodhounds, bounty hunters, even other slaves were forced to track him. But he vanished into the wilderness like smoke into the wind. And then the killings began. Hunters found their dogs slaughtered. Plantation patrols were ambushed in the dark. Wagons burned at midnight. And from the trees, they said, you could hear a man whisper, every whip remembers the back it kissed. That's how the legend began. The slave who became the hunter. The man who turned pain into purpose. He built traps deep in the Cumberland Plateau, a labyrinth of caves and cliffs no white man dared enter. Runaways found him there, starved, wounded, hopeless. And Samuel became their shepherd. Some called him a devil. Others called him deliverer. But all who followed him learned one rule. You don't run from chains. You burn them. Word of the Phantom spread across the South. He raided plantations, freed dozens, burned fields, and vanished again. Every slave he freed carried the same message. Freedom lives in the mountains. And soon, slaveholders began to tremble. Plantation bells rang at midnight not for prayer, but for warning. Some swore they saw him standing on the ridge at dawn, watching the plantations below like a silent god of vengeance. But Samuel Green was no god. He was a man, and men carry ghosts. One night, he returned to the Johnson Plantation, not for revenge, but for his mother, Soft Melody, a woman humming faintly in memory. She had been too weak to flee the first time. He found her shack empty. The overseer told him she was gone, buried in an unmarked grave behind the field. Samuel stood there for hours, staring at the dirt. Then he took his knife and carved words into the wood of her cabin. You took her body, but you can't bury her blood. Then he burned the entire plantation. By morning, nothing was left but ash and rumor. It was then that Samuel Green became more than a fugitive. He became a symbol. Southern papers called him the devil in the hills. But among the enslaved, songs began to spread, quoted him sung in the fields and whispered in the dark. In the hollow of the ridge, a man walks free. His mother sleeps, but her son don't bleed. And yet, even legends have endings. In 1846, a federal detachment was sent to capture him. 30 men, led by a captain named Harlan Pike. They tracked him for weeks through mud and rain, until one dawn, they found the smoke of his camp. Gunfire erupted. The forest became a battlefield. Men screamed, horses fell, and through it all, Samuel fought like the ghost they believed him to be. When it was over, 12 soldiers lay dead. Samuel was wounded, bleeding, but alive. He dragged himself to the top of the ridge, where his people waited. And from that height, he saw smoke rising from another direction, another plantation burning. Not his doing this time. Someone else had taken up his cause. You see, rebellion is a flame. You can kill the man, but not the spark he leaves behind. They never found Samuel Green's body. Some say he died in those hills. Others claim he went west, joined the Black Seminoles, and fought alongside native tribes against the U.S. Army. But every generation since has found a man like him, a man the powerful call trouble, and the powerless call hope. From Domingo's candlelit rebellion in Lima to Samuel's fire in the American hills, the story is the same. A man denied dignity, who found a way to reclaim it, not with permission, but with defiance. And maybe that's why history tries to forget them, because the moment you remember, you start to question the comfort of silence. Two men, separated by oceans, united by chains, and by the will to break them. Their names may fade, but their rebellion remains, because the story of freedom was never written by kings. It was carved, whispered, and bled into the earth by those the world tried to erase. And this is their echo, centuries apart. Two men, bound by different masters, walked the same road, one through the corridors of marble, the other through forests of ash. Domingo, Samuel Green, names carved into silence. Names history tried to bury under dust and denial. But history forgets one thing. Blood remembers. After Lima's scandal was buried, the crown scribes rewrote the story. The Marquise was remembered for her piety, her daughters for their virtue. Domingo was never mentioned again. But every family in Lima whispered another tale, that when the mansion's chandeliers flickered at night, you could still hear the laughter of a man who refused to kneel, a laughter that frightened the noble and freed the souls of the servants still bound in fear. In Alabama, years after Samuel's uprising, the plantations were rebuilt, the overseers were replaced, and the fields grew green again. But every wind that crossed the Cumberland Ridge carried stories. Children of a newly freed whispered his name in secret. The mountain man still watches. And mothers, when their sons spoke of giving up, would say, "Don't forget who broke the chains first." Empires have always feared memory. They burn the letters, destroy the portraits, rewrite the records, and silence the tongues. But what they never understand is that memory doesn't live in paper. It lives in pain. It lives in the soil. And pain is patient. It waits. Lima, 1803. Alabama, 1843. Two stories. Two revolts. Two acts of defiance whispered through centuries. Domingo challenged lust wrapped in power. Samuel challenged power wrapped in law. And in both, the question remains, when the world owns your body, how do you keep your soul free? Perhaps freedom was never just about the breaking of chains. Perhaps it was about the refusal to forget what those chains felt like. That is what unites them. And us. Today, the mansions of Lima are tourist attractions. The Johnson Plantation is a ruin hidden by vines. But in both places, the earth remembers. If you listen closely, beneath the wind, you can still hear them. The voices of those who were told they were nothing. The voices of men who dare to prove otherwise. Domingo's laughter, Samuel's whisper, Two echoes from two continents, two flames in two eras. And perhaps, in this moment, as you listen, you feel the truth burning beneath the centuries. The oppressed are never truly silent. They are simply waiting to be heard. Empires fall, but the stories they try to hide rise again, because even as one age of chains ended, another began. Whispers of a new kind of war, fought not with swords or muskets, but with hunger, poverty, and law. And somewhere in the smoky horizon, a new voice begins to rise. History doesn't sleep. It shifts its shape. And soon, we'll hear its roar again. So remember, freedom is inherited. It's chosen. Every generation must choose it again. And when you hear the next story, the next rebellion, remember this. The echoes of chains never fade. They only wait for someone brave enough to listen. You've just witnessed a truth many would rather forget. That power changes faces, but never its hunger. If this story made you think, if it stirred something in your chest, then subscribe to PhilioHistoryTV, because here, we don't just tell stories, we resurrect them. Like, share, and join our growing circle of thinkers, dreamers, and seekers of truth. Until the next echo of history calls, remember, freedom is not given, it is remembered.